Martin,
Yes. Have you
privileged
got?
to be part of this gathering of experts. I feel like I have to step up to the plate here and try to do my best to explain the history of my mom, which is quite extraordinary when I think about it. My mother's name is Mary Elizabeth Van Valkenburg Thornton, which is a heck of a handle when you think about it.
Brilliant. Greg, just to interrupt, sorry, could you just hit share screen, Greg, and put up your slides there so that way we know it's working? So the green shared screen like we did yesterday evening, yeah?
There you go, I hit it.
And then click on the slides on the screen. Have you got the slides open?
Yep.
Okay, it should come up on your screen in a few seconds then. It's not coming up for some reason, Greg.
I don't know why.
So just, you're the host, so just click the shared screen.
Yep.
And then the 2 or 3 screens should open up on your computer, and click the one that your slide presentation is in.
That's it. No?
No, unfortunately, it hasn't come up with that.
I apologize.
No worries, no worries. What we can do, Greg, is just tell us the story, and
Well, let me
because
see
your
if I
story
can-
is interesting there.
Is that it?
Unfortunately, no, it hasn't.
Well, I don't quite know.
Yeah,
Hold on, Martin.
no
Let me try
worries.
this. Let me try this. Yes?
No, we're still. You probably can see it yourself on the screen. It's just we're just seeing your image at the moment.
Well, I don't. I apologize for having this
Oh,
problem.
no worries, no worries.
Oh, wait. Should I do advanced sharing options?
No, it should be. You're down as the host. If you just go into share screen, click on
Right.
share screen.
Yep,
Have you clicked on the shared screen? Yeah.
I have.
And then what? There you go. You've got it now.
Is that it?
That's it, Greg. Fantastic.
I
Fantastic.
apologize.
No
Here we
worries.
go.
Listen, it's a great story. You have us all on edge. This was a part of your ploy. We know that, Greg. Fantastic.
Well, here we are. Forgive me, everyone, for
No worries. And just click on
starting
that
off a little
slide.
slowly.
Yeah, brilliant.
Well, this is
That's it.
my mom right here in the middle on her 90th birthday, 6 years ago now. Now, her history began in New York City. She was born in 1923. And from everything I knew growing up and then beginning to put our family history together, our understanding was that Mom and her father, not my mother, but her dad's family, all came from Holland. Her mother's family came from Ireland. So that's sort of where it all began. And down there in the right corner is a picture of where our history and her history has taken to Castle Blakeney in Galway. So we are thrilled to have been able to find this. It's been quite a journey. And it began, as I said, in New York City in 1923. Now, I began working on my family's history when my dad had written as you can see in this slide, in my older brother's baby book, a 2-page family history. And this is my mom's side of the family. She was a von Valkenburg before she became a Thornton. As I said, born in New York City. And we all thought her father, my grandfather, Danforth Van Valkenburg, came from Holland, settled in upstate New York, married a Frances O'Neill, who was from Harrison, New Jersey, in the New York City area. And they had At least we thought at the time. My mom, Mary Elizabeth, who was all known her whole life as Betty. So I began looking at my family history in the mid 80s. That's about 35 years ago. And that was pre-computers, pre-DNA testing, pre-digitized records. Many of us have began our family histories with those kinds of challenges. So for me, the initial steps to knowing my family's history was to know my grandparents, where that my parents, my grandparents, and my great grandparents, where they were born and where their addresses were. And that's about all I had to go on. So looking at my father's family tree that he wrote, it was, I said, it was only 2 pages. And so that in the 80s, it initially took me to, as I began to study the records, if you lived in the New York area where I did, you could go to the National Archives building, which is on Varick Street in downtown New York, where there isn't a 45, 90-degree angle anywhere in the entire island of Manhattan. But this is the building, and we were way up there on the 12th floor somewhere. You would sit in these small cubicles, but this building housed the census records of the United States from 1790 to then 1940, which you could also find naturalization records, passenger arrival records, custom records, draft, and military services records. And you would sit in these tiny little cubicles and you would look on these rolls of microfilm and you would roll and roll and roll until you could find some record of the census of your family. So that's what I did. And for many days, I was working in New York doing some shows. So when I had a little time, I would head on the subway downtown, go up to the 12th floor, sit in a tiny little cubicle, and there were all sorts of people in their cubicles, and you'd roll through the microfilms. Many of us remember how to do when we had to do that. So then what you would do is you would take the microfilm out, you would go around the corner to a machine that would transfer it to a paper copy, which looked a bit like this. So then you would print them out and you would get these huge sheaves of paper. So I would find my mom's family, the 1860 census, which found them up in upstate New York, in the Catskill areas north of New York City, and her mother's family in New Jersey. As I said, you would just print out these enormous sheets. So you would have to have 3-ring binders, you would fill in your family history, and slowly you would build this record of your family's history. And again, so what happened was about 5 years ago, the National Archives moved to this gorgeous building in the Bowling Green area of New York City. And you can see down here on the bottom, fabulous laptop areas, and everything would be all digitized by then. So when we finally got to digitized records, we were so lucky then to have all that. And what happened was I found finally by joining Ancestry in the early 21st century, I found my grandfather's census records in 1930. And there's my mom, Betty, 6 years old. And that is all I knew about where she was born and where her parents raised her. So what happened was things started to, as I continued to look through family history and finding how people research their families, I was able to find my dad's family all in Dublin. My ancestors on both sides of his family come from Dublin. But as I was sitting in the cubicles there in the archive building, I remember one time going with my younger brother because he wanted to find out how I was doing this. We were sitting in the cubicle going through the microfilm, and every now and then we would find a census record. And I'd say, here, Dave, take this to the machine and print out a paper copy of this. And next to us was a man who kept grunting and sighing and heaving the whole time we were there that day. We were there for about 6 hours. So finally, I leaned across the cubicle and I said to him, do you mind if I ask you who you're looking for? And he said, well, I see you guys are having a lot of luck. I said, well, what's the name you're trying to find? and exasperated gasp, he announces, "I'm looking for a Smith." So I'm thinking, oh my God, trying to find a Smith in all of these microfilm records is talk about a needle in a haystack. I just felt so bad for him. I think he's probably still there in that cubicle, still looking. He may have found them by now, and I hope he has. I know how long it took me to find the Murphy side of my dad's family and their records, baptismal records, which I finally found. But you know, if you walk into a pub in Dublin trying to find a Murphy, half the place is going to stand up. But so again, the challenges of trying to find your family's history when you have names like Smith, names like Murphy, not so easy. My mother's family name was Van Valkenburg, which is a common Dutch name, but his records were fairly easy to find. So as I said, when we finally got to digitized records, you were able to just increase your research. And what it told me in many ways was something that you sort of come across certain clues as you look for your family's history. Some things just don't kind of jibe sometimes. And one of the things that didn't make sense to me was my mother was born in New York City. Now, this is 1923. My mother's parents lived in a town, as you can see on this Google map, lived in this town right here. It's hard to read, but it's Bloomfield, New Jersey. Now, Bloomfield, New Jersey is about 25 miles from New York City, which is over here in this corner. Now, that is about an hour's drive, maybe 45 minutes if you're lucky. You can also take a train into New York, but you have to make connections, and it's easily a 45-minute trip. And in 1923, I'm trying to imagine that it probably took a lot longer than half hour to 45 minutes because the interstates weren't all completed by then. And so it made me wonder why my grandparents, my mother's parents, the Van Valkenburgs, would travel from Bloomfield, New Jersey to Manhattan to have this baby. It just seemed a tad odd to me. I didn't have any proof of anything other than her birth certificate said New York City. Now, Bloomfield is very near Newark, which is a very large city in New Jersey, and there are major hospitals, great research centers all through that area. And you would think, wouldn't it have been easier for them to have a baby somewhere here rather than way over here? Travel 45 minutes, you know, as an expectant mother, things tend to happen. It's a stressful time. And when the hour arrives, you may not want to make that trip. So that struck me as a bit odd. It was just one of those clues, those flags that come up as you're looking through your family history. And I often ask my mother about that. And she said, well, my father said he knew a man in New York. That is all she ever told me. And I never could quite understand what that meant in terms of her birth and her family story. But as I said, that is kind of the clue that came up to me and a bit of a red flag. And so one of the ways, and we all know this, to find family records, especially during the time when things were not quite digitized, were to go to family cemeteries. Now, this family cemetery, Holy Sepulchre, is outside the city of Newark, and it is huge. It is one of the largest cemeteries in the metropolitan New York area. My dad's entire family, has an enormous plot there, and there must be graves for over 50 people on my Thornton and Murphy side of the family. Now, my mother's grandparents are O'Neills on my mother's side, and they have a plot in this cemetery as well. So I thought, well, while I was taking the records and I'm taking notes of my dad's family's grave sites, marking the years they were born, and I would go to the parish office, which was run by a very unpleasant lady. She would give me the books and I'd copy down the records all, pen and ink on a yellow legal pad. I said, well, let me go see where the O'Neills plot is. So I found out where it was, and I walked down to a plot that looked a little bit like this down here in this picture. But now this is a Catholic cemetery. Pat referenced a little bit of this in New Jersey, and it may be true in Ireland as well. Catholic cemeteries are for Catholics. There was a law, a canon law about if you were not a non-Catholic, you could not be buried in a Catholic cemetery. That since has changed, thank God. But at this point in time, non-Catholics were not buried there. Now, my mother's father was a Protestant, so his family is not here. But my grandmother was an Irish Catholic. Her name was Frances O'Neill. Her father's plot is in the cemetery. So I went down and I took some notes, and I realized as I'm standing there, there's a stone, as you can see this tiny stone here, and we've been in enough cemeteries. The grass was kind of overgrowing this particular stone. So I pulled away the grass, and the name of Robert Van Valkenburg appears on the stone in the ground, about 6 feet removed from the O'Neill tombstone. So I thought, Van Valkenburg. Now, why would that stone be on this, in this gravesite? So I head back to the cemetery office. The very unpleasant lady is sitting there, and she said, "Oh, you're back." And I said, "I would like to find out if you can find this record for me." So she begrudgingly turned around, brought some books, some record books down from the shelf. I said, "I'm trying to find the record for this Robert Van Valkenburg." So she goes through the book. She says, "Oh yeah, that's here in the O'Neill plot." I said, that's right. Thanks. If you could just give me any information you have there." So I'm writing it down. She said, it says here in the record, infant death. So my head went up, infant death. And she said, 1921. I said, "All right, well, thank you very much." So again, that became another clue, a major clue, as it turns out, to finding some things about my mom's birth. And so maybe a month later, I take my mother on a trip. It was a bit of a trip for where she lived, to the cemetery. She was fascinated by how much I found out about my dad's family and what I was finding out about her family. So I show her the big Thornton plot, and I said, "Mom, come walk with me." So we walked down to the graves of her O'Neill grandparents. And by then, again, the grass is overgrowing this stone in the ground. So she goes, "Oh, well, there's my grandfather, there's my grandmother. Oh, there's the aunt who used to live with us." I said, "Okay, Mom, tell me who you think this is." So I cleared away the stone again, and she looks at this gravestone that says Robert Van Valkenburg. And my mother turns away and starts walking back to the car, doesn't say a word. So I felt kind of awful about this. So I walk back to the car, we get in the car, and we just take a drive back to her house. My mother doesn't say a word to me for the entire time. And I realized maybe I made a mistake by showing her this. Anyway, we get into her house, and she finally sits down, pours herself a glass of wine, and said, "What do you think? I don't know who that person is. What do you think this is about?" So forgive me. So I said, "Mom, the record in the cemetery says Robert Van Valkenburg, infant death, 1921. I said, "You were born in 1923. Forgive me." I said, I think this is what might have happened. That your mother had this baby, Robert, who died, I'm thinking, in childbirth. And it's highly possible she was not able to have any more children. Possible. Not an unusual story. One other thing about my grandparents, my mother's parents, they were quite a bit older than she was when she was born, easily in their late 30s. So again, those kinds of flags. Now in 1923, an older couple I mean, they may not be having babies at that point in their lifetimes. I mean, that's just one of the things you kind of think about as you look at your family history. So those two flags, the long distance to a hospital in New York City, the infant death of this brother of my mother's, who she knew nothing about. So we kept looking through the history. Finally, Ancestry comes up. I take the DNA test in 2015. And as I'm looking through my Ancestry ethnicity, those of us who belong to Ancestry, see this. My ethnicity shows here 86% Irish, the rest fairly small amounts, but no Dutch blood at all in my family ethnicity, none whatsoever. And as I look at this, also, I'm looking at shared matches that come my way. I will go back to this in a minute, that come my way. There's absolutely no mention of any O'Neill in any of the shared matches in the breakdowns of my DNA. Now, I would have to guess that somewhere in Ancestry, there's an O'Neill who took the test. And, you know, it's highly possible they weren't related to me, but the fact that there's no Dutch blood at all showing up in my ethnicity struck me as odd. So finally, what we did on my mother's 94th birthday, we gave her a Ancestry DNA test. My 94-year-old mother, we had a big birthday party for her. And about an hour before we left the restaurant, I said, Mom, that's probably the last glass of wine you can have. We have to go take this DNA test. So we go back to her house. She spits in the tube. I send it off to Ancestry. Maybe a month and a half later, the results come back for my mother. Now, what shows up? Now I'm showing you my DNA test. See this name here, Gene Hunter. Shows a fairly large CM account, fairly large percentage of DNA to me. Probably says here half aunt. So my mother's Ancestry DNA tests come back, and there she is. 76% Irish. Again, the rest sort of small amounts, Scottish mostly. Absolutely no Dutch ancestry at all shows up in this pie chart. Again, it struck me as, I think this is telling me something. My mother doesn't have any Dutch ancestry, which makes me think at least her father, who we thought was her father, my grandfather, may not have been her father. So again, on my mother's breakdown of shared matches, there's me, there's my sister, and again, there's my nephew. See the large matches here. Now here's Gene Hunter again showing up in a huge amount of centimorgans, which says to me the relationship could be a half sister, might very well be a first cousin. But I'm going on this a little bit, thinking in the back of the fact that perhaps my grandmother could not have more children. So I'm looking at this. So what I did was, and many of us have done this on Ancestry, we send a message via the Ancestry message tab to this Gene Hunter. Now, when I clicked on her name, she had no family tree, no information at all. So I send her a message, nothing happens, nothing happens. Months and months go by. We're now in my mother took the DNA test in 2018. We're now in January of 2019. So as Pat Murphy said in her talk, you have to be patient. So what I started to do was go on to various websites, Facebook pages, the Ballygar one being one, and I noticed Pat Murphy's name. So I just dropped her a message and Pat got back to me right away. She said, well, tell me all the things you know. So we kept exchanging some terrific email messages, and Pat has been an incredible correspondent and a help ever since. She said, have you tried to find this Gene Hunter on Facebook? I said, no, I haven't, but I certainly will try. So we went around and, you know, Facebook, I'm not a troller. I don't use a lot of Facebook. but it's great for genealogy, and many of you know this. Finally, I find Jane Hunter, and she finally gets back to me and says, here's my email address. Tell me what you think you know. So she and I share some emails. And in one of the emails, she says, I have to tell you, I was adopted too. I finally share the story of my thinking about my mother, that she was adopted. She said, I was adopted too. And I have my birth certificate. My adoptive parents gave this to me when I was 10. I said, oh, and what is the information? She said, well, it has a name on it, Mary Hughes. I said, oh, well, that's good to know. She says she also, and this, I was adopted in a city called Jersey City, which is right outside New York City. She said, I don't know why I was given up, but my family, I was happy to grow up in the Hunter household. And I've had a wonderful life, a great sister. And it turns out, as I want to show you this, Gene Hunter, turns out Gene Hunter grew up in Cranford, New Jersey. My family lived in Galway, New Jersey, and those two towns are 10 minutes from each other outside the New York City area. So for all my mother's life, this half-sister, we find out, only lived 10 minutes away from her. She never met her. So what I started to do was track through all these terrific sites, and many of you know all these. National Library of Ireland has the great church parish registers. I use this all the time. It's how I found my Murphy side of the family. It took me 25 years to find them, but I found them in Dublin and found their baptismal records, and they belong to the same church in the Liberty section of Dublin, St. Nicholas, where my Thornton ancestors are all from as well. Great, great website. If you don't know about it, I highly recommend it. This is also a great site as well. Church records are terrific at the Irish Genealogy site, but this particular tab right here leads you to all sorts of other records. So as I was searching through the census records through the Hughes family in New Jersey, I tracked back through my DNA shared matches, came up with a lot of Garrity matches whose families were Garrity's, also Hughes's. So as I tried to track that down, I came across a Mary Ellen Garrity who emigrated to the United States. And I found out through Ireland reaching out, her family also turns out came from Galway. I'm tracking through some of these terrific web pages that I highly recommend. The very end of my presentation, I have a whole resource page, which I'm quite happy to share with you. But again, you track down through these sites, GEDmatch, also fantastic. And you know all this, Family Tree DNA. These are great sites. The Church of Latter-day Saints Family Search is a fantastic resource as well, as is MyHeritage. And also John Grenham's website for just searching through surnames and places is incredible. But here is where I found the best help I could possibly have found, thanks to Pat Murphy and some of the folks on the Ballygar Facebook group page. The DNA Detectives has a fabulous Facebook page, and a volunteer helped me track down my what I thought were pretty close clues to finding who my mother's birth mother was. And it turns out we did find her in Galway. And so when I went back to Ballygar, I put a message out, and some of you may have seen it quite some time ago. I'm trying to find some Garrity's who might have been through from Ballygar, because I did find, again, and also in Malbellew and in the East Galway sites. I'm trying to find this. Here's what I found on the Church of the National Library of Ireland. James and Sarah Fahey, James Garrity, my great-grandparents, my mother's grandparents, who are from the Henna and my grandmother Sarah Faye from Gnode. But this is their marriage record at St. Patrick's Church in Mount Bellew, and this is the restoration of it there in the right corner. It's pretty amazing what they've been able to do with that fabulous church structure. And here is another way to, as I got a hold of the Garrity family, and I was so lucky to find them in Castle Blakeney. They sent me some pictures, and so you try to match up pictures of various family members. This is my mom here in the corner. With my older brother Paul. There's my mom and dad. That's my mom. Here's Mary Ellen Garrity, and this is Mary Ellen Garrity with her sister Rose. I can't blow this up any more than that, and she sure as heck looks like my sister, whose name is also Mary Ellen, by the way. Now here is Mary Ellen Garrity's birth record, which is a little hard to see, but you see the second entry down here. Here is where she is, right there. Born to James from Lahanna and Sarah Garrity Faye. And there is her record, Mount Bellew, Clonbrock, County Galway. Now, here is, as you can see, many of you already know all this. And as I said, I was preceded by some incredible experts, but there's Clonbrock, Ashcra, and there's Castle Blakeney, where my Garrity ancestors and my Garrity cousins still live, right there. And there I found Mary Ellen Garrity here's the passenger list from the Celtic ship, rightly named, sailed out of Liverpool on May 19th, 1919. You look way down here, there's Mary Garrity at the age of 17. I don't know why they listed her as a housekeeper already, but there she is. And there's where she's from, Castle Blakeney. There's her father, James, from the same town. So again, these resources that we have access to now are just pretty extraordinary. And so finding all of that, I finally, through the Ballygar page, I found, going back, sorry for the quick jumping, I found who I knew to be who I thought anyway, Pat Garrity. So on his birthday, two and a half years ago it is now, I sent him the Ancestry DNA test. He was quite grateful to take it. And Pat showed up once he finally got his results, he says, we're second cousins. I found the answers. So we have corresponded ever since. Now, here's my mom. As you look at family resemblances, I showed this to Martin the other day. He said, oh my God, here's my mom, Betty Thornton, and here's one of her cousins, Ann Garrity. And you can see, it takes some doing, but there they are. And there's a fairly strong family resemblance. So in September, my wife, Pat, and I finally made our very first trip to Ireland. And we spent 5 days in Galway. And I had tried to put together family trees for Pat and his family. And here are some of Pat's generations going back. There's Pat Porek right there, born in Ballinasloe. His partner, Lisa. There are their two children. And there's Pat's dad, James, Jimmy Garrity, who sadly died at a very young age of 40. There's Mary Crahan Garrity from Mount Bellew. Her father, Patrick, her mother, Mary Mamie from Tumard, Ballinasloe. Here's Michael from Castle Blakeney. There's Mary Teresa Rush from Mount Bellew. Again, James and Sarah, Thomas, Patrick. You can see here we are, another Mannion connection. And Michael Carty, I'm sure some of you from Killian of County Galway, and that's Pat's tree. And Mary is just beginning to find, or Lisa is just beginning to find her family because her mom, Mary, comes from the mother and baby home in County Tipperary, and that has become an amazing search for her. But here's some of Martin's cousins, Brady Walsh and the Blade family. And there's Mary Crahan Garrity's family tree, again on her side, all from County Galway, all from the Montbellew, Ballinasloe area. And it has just been an amazing journey to find them. And as I said, when we finally got to meet them just over a month ago in late September, we were just, what a trip we had. And here we are in Galway City. And there's Pat. There I am. There's Mary. There's my wife, Pat. Here's some of the family. Here we are raising a glass to each other. You can see a bit of this family resemblance there, I believe. I've got a few years on him, but there's Pat right there and his older brother, Michal, and Seamus behind the, sorry about that. And here again, I'll show you. Here's that close up of that, and here's Pat and I again. I think you can pretty well see a family resemblance there. And I'm happy to show you this one. Here's my brother, Brian. There's Pat. You certainly can see it in both of those two fellows. And the younger generations too. Here's my grandson, Sean Patrick Thornton, not a bad Irish name. He was not named after the movie, I have to tell you that. And he's not the quiet man, to be sure. And here is Pat and Lisa's elder, Noah. I mean, it's fairly obvious there's some family resemblance in all of that. And what a treat it was to be able to spend such time with them. And I would not have been able to find any of this out if it had not been through the DNA tests that I took and that my mom took and that Pat very graciously took for us. And we continue to explore this history. And there we are in Castle Blakeney. There's Pat, there's my wife, Pat, there I am. There's Anne Garrity Griffin, who would be the closest blood relative to my mom. And Pat and her husband, Seamus, live in Rahoon, outside Galway City. But this is the family farmhouse in Castle Blakeney, built circa 1940 would be my guess. And this is where my grandmother, Mary Ellen Garrity, was born, and she shared this house with 9 people. And I am, in my understanding, a couple of cattle as well. And from what I understand, that is not unusual. But as we went inside, Seamus has turned this into an incredible workshop. But I am trying to imagine 8 to 9 people and a few cattle trying to manage a home in this structure. I grew up in a house with 9 people, but we had two stories in our house, so it's a little bit easier. But when I saw that and stood out front of it, it was quite an emotional experience. And then we went to Cultra and went to Our Lady of Lourdes, where my Garrity family was, many of them baptized, and the cemetery right outside the church. And this is my great-grandparents' gravestone. And this is Mary's husband, Michael, my mother's cousin, and Mary Teresa. And this is where Jimmy Garrity, my Pat's dad, and Mary's husband is buried. It's quite a moving experience. As I was saying to Martin, when you do all this research and then all of a sudden you're standing on the ground in front of the records, in front of the actual thing you spent this time researching, and there it is, palpable in flesh and blood, is an extraordinary experience to have. And I'm ever grateful for it and look forward to our next chance to come back. So this is the resource page. These are all many of you know all of these sites, but I kind of break them down for me in terms of that being the most helpful, and all of these are hugely helpful. And I'm happy to share this with anyone who would like it. And I can email it to Martin, or I can put it on the Ballygar Facebook page, and or I can send my email address, and whoever would like to have this just as a quick reference page, more than welcome to share that with all of you. And I appreciate your patience. And this has been a real treat to be able to share my mom's story, which is ongoing. And thanks so much for allowing me to have this time. So there you are, Martin.
Greg, thank you so much. And listening to you, the emotion of that connection was so obvious. And thank you for sharing that. And obviously, as some of us know, your mom, and as you mentioned there, maybe if you just put up that picture of your mom there again, Greg, the very top one, please, at that, because Greg's mom just passed away there recently. And what a wonderful tribute this talk is to her, and just to share her wonderful story.
That was taken when she was 90. We lost her to the demon COVID in April of 2020. But I was able to tell her about her family, her blood family, her birth family before she passed away. And another flag for me was when she said to me, she was an only child, born, she thought, of much older parents. She said, I never knew I had a family. And now I know I do.
And thanks to you for doing that. What a gift to give to your own mom, to get her connected to her family. Greg, I'm just looking at the comments there. There's quite a number of your family here in Galway online at the moment, sending their love, and for us as well. And I have to say great credit to Pat Abernathy there for what she has done, as she has done so often with others to help out there.
She has been extraordinary in helping me, as have you, Martin, and David, Lauren for sure. I mean, you just got to dig through and be patient. And we all know that when you finally find the discoveries and it shows up on the screen, you go, yes, a little bit of grace visiting you in that search. It's pretty extraordinary.
It's fantastic. I'm going to stop the recording here, and then we'll have some time for comments and questions.
Okay.
And again, Greg, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation.